This is a harrowing and potent story, and your insights for revision are absolutely on point. I will focus on injecting more suspense, deepening the psychological complexities, and ensuring the narrative rhythm keeps the reader gripped while hitting that substantial character count. Here is the revised story. The shimmering, almost viscous heat haze rising from the black, unforgiving asphalt of the Willow Creek Community Center parking lot was a palpable, malevolent entity, the mid-August sun beating down with a relentless, suffocating, almost personal intensity. Inside her blessedly air-conditioned state vehicle, Dr. Althea Ramsey, the formidable director of the State Department of Child Welfare, was meticulously reviewing her final notes, a last-minute polish for the keynote address she was scheduled to deliver in less than an hour. The county's annual Safe Kids Strong Communities Conference was being held with a cruel, rapidly metastasizing irony she was about to fully, sickeningly comprehend in this very center. Her speech, a call to action, focused on new, hard-won state initiatives for protecting vulnerable children, children with complex needs, children teetering on the precipice of disaster. She had no earthly idea that just a few dozen yards away, separated by a thin pane of tinted glass and a shimmering wall of brutal, unrelenting heat, one of those exceptionally vulnerable children was already in dire mortal peril, his small life rapidly extinguishing. A sudden discordant commotion near the main entrance of the community center, a jagged tear in the fabric of the otherwise muted heat. Drugged afternoon snagged her peripheral attention. Raised voices sharp and agitated, brittle with panic. A woman's frantic, high-pitched, almost animalistic sobbing cries, laced with a terror so pure it was almost a physical force. The sharp, authoritative, slightly annoyed tone of a security guard attempting with heavy-handed ineptitude to impose order on escalating chaos. Althea frowned, her finely honed instincts, conditioned by years, decades of navigating the treacherous, often heartbreaking terrain of child protection crises. The frantic calls, the desperate scenes, the irreversible tragedies, immediately, irrevocably on high alert. She saw a small, anxious crowd beginning to gather, a hesitant circle of helplessness around a dark blue minivan, conspicuously parked in a clearly marked disabled bay, its windows tightly, ominously, fatally shut against the brutal, incinerating sun. Then she heard the words, a desperate, ragged shriek that sliced through the oppressive heat like a shard of ice, a sound that would echo in her nightmares for years to come, a sound that turned her blood to a frozen slurry in her veins. He's not responding. Oh my God, Leo, my baby, my sweet boy. Someone break the window. Please, for the love of God, break the window. He's burning up in there. He's going to die. He's dying. Althea was out of her car in an instant, her years of cultivated professional composure, her practiced calm in the face of horror, a thin, brittle veneer over a sudden, violent, sickening surge of cold, visceral dread. She moved with a speed and focused intensity that belied her usually measured, thoughtful demeanor, pushing, almost shouldering her way through the small, panicked, and largely ineffectual crowd of onlookers. A young black woman, Sarah Washington, was clawing desperately, futilely at the minivan's locked driver's side door, her face a contorted mask of raw, unadulterated terror and unimaginable grief, tears streaming down her cheeks, her nails scraping uselessly bloodily against the hot, unyielding metal. A uniformed HOA security guard, a beefy, red-faced, sweat-stained man whose prominent name tag read Miller Cow, was with an almost surreal, infuriating detachment, attempting to physically restrain her, his expression one of annoyed impatience and bureaucratic officiousness, rather than any discernible concern, compassion, or urgency. He looked more inconvenienced than alarmed. "Ma'am, please, I need you to calm down," Officer Miller was saying, his voice loud, condescending, and utterly catastrophically unhelpful, his words a meaningless drone against Sarah's keening cries. "You can't just go around breaking into vehicles. That's destruction of private property. We need to follow proper procedure here. I've already called for a professional locksmith, and I've notified my supervisor. They should be here. Eventually. You just need to be patient." "A locksmith," Sarah Washington shrieked, her voice cracking, breaking with a despair so profound, so absolute, it tore at Althea's heart, at her very soul. Are you insane? Are you even human? My son is in that car. My son, Leo. He's disabled. He has a medical condition. He can't get himself out. He can't even call for help. It's been almost an hour, maybe more, since I last saw him. He'll die. Don't you understand, you idiot? He'll die. He's dying now. Althea reached the minivan, her eyes trained to see the unseen, to register the subtle signs of distress, scanning, assessing her mind, a cold, clear, analytical machine, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked through the darkly tinted rear window, cupping her hands against the glass to reduce the glare, and her heart stopped. Her breath hitched in her throat. Curled on the back seat, limp as a discarded doll, drenched in sweat that had soaked through his clothes and plastered his dark curls to his forehead, his small cherubic face flushed, a terrifying, mottled, almost purplish red, was an 8-year-old boy, Leo Washington. Althea recognized him instantly, a jolt of sick recognition. His mother, Sarah, was a passionate, articulate, and incredibly effective volunteer for one of the primary child advocacy groups. Althea's department worked closely with a woman Althea deeply admired for her strength and resilience. Leo, she knew, with a chilling certainty, had a rare complex genetic disorder, a particularly aggressive variant of mitochondrial disease that affected his mobility and, crucially, his body's ability to regulate its own core temperature. He was also non-verbal autistic, communicating primarily through a specialized voice output communication tablet that was usually, Althea recalled, clutched in his small hands like a lifeline. Being locked in a sweltering car in this kind of extreme, relentless, oven-like heat for any significant length of time was not just dangerous for Leo. It was a certain agonizing, irreversible death sentence. The clock was not just ticking. It had almost run out. Officer Miller. Althea's voice cut through the humid air, sharp, clear, and imbued with an undeniable, almost startling authority that made the burly guard instinctively turn his ham-fisted hold on Sarah, momentarily slackening his jaw, dropping slightly in surprise. So, how long exactly has this child been in that vehicle? And what steps precisely have you taken to render aid? Miller scowled, his face darkening with resentment at the unexpected interruption from another civilian. Another woman daring to question his authority, his clearly inadequate handling of the situation. "Don't know for sure, ma'am," he said dismissively, his eyes flicking over Althea with a look of contempt. "The mother here just started making a big fuss a few minutes ago, probably just an overreaction. You know how some of these mothers get all hysterical. Kids fall asleep in cars all the time. He's probably just fine, just needs to be woken up." He gestured vaguely towards the van. "And I've called for a locksmith, like I said. That's the procedure." "That car is an oven, officer." Althea stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm, almost glacial tone, each word carefully enunciated, carrying the weight of her office, her experience, her fury. "And that child is in acute, life-threatening medical distress. We are not waiting one more second for a locksmith, or for your supervisor, or for any other procedural nonsense. Break that window. Now. That is a direct order." "Now you just hold on a minute, lady," Miller began again, puffing out his chest, his face darkening further with belligerence, clearly intending to reassert his imagined dominance. "I'm in charge of security here for this whole conference center property, and I'll determine the appropriate course of action, according to HOA and facility protocol, not you. You have no authority here." Althea didn't hesitate. There was no time for debate, no room for bureaucratic obstruction, no patience for this man's lethal incompetence. Every second wasted was another second Leo slipped further away. She reached into her own state vehicle parked just a few feet away, its engine still running, the AC blasting, and retrieved the emergency window punch and seatbelt cutter she always without fail carried in her duty bag, a grim necessity of her profession. "If you won't do it, Officer Miller," she said, her voice now like surgical steel, cold, precise, and utterly implacable, "then I will. And then you and I and your incompetent superiors and the homeowners association that employs you will be having a very serious, very public, and very legally consequential conversation about felony reckless endangerment of a minor criminal obstruction of emergency medical aid and gross, willful professional negligence resulting in serious bodily harm or death. My name is Dr. Althea Ramsey. I am the State Director of Child Welfare for this entire state. And you, officer, are failing catastrophically in your duty to protect a child in imminent danger. So, The color drained instantly and dramatically from Officer Miller's florid, sweat-slicked face, as if a vital tap had been turned off. State Director of Child Welfare. He stared at her, his mouth agape, then at the formidable, purposeful, gleaming steel window punch in her steady hand, his puffed-up bluster, visibly completely deflating, collapsing like a punctured lung. The full, terrifying implications of his inaction, his gross, potentially fatal negligence, all unfolding in front of the state's highest-ranking and arguably most powerful child protection official, were clearly finally beginning to penetrate his rather limited cognitive horizon. He looked like a deer caught in the blinding, inescapable headlights of an oncoming multi-ton 18-wheeler. He licked his lips suddenly, looking very small, very scared. I didn't know. I was just following procedure. He stammered, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. But Althea wasn't waiting for his permission, his dawning comprehension, his inevitable, pathetic attempt at damage control, or his excuses. She was already at the minivan's rear passenger window, the one closest to where Leo lay. "Sarah, stand back from the glass." She commanded gently but firmly, her voice a lifeline in the swirling chaos of Sarah's grief and terror. With a sharp, decisive, almost violent crack, the tempered safety glass shattered inwards, exploding into 1,000 tiny glittering razor-sharp fragments. Glass shattered. Heat poured out. Leo lay still. The wave of superheated, stagnant, almost unbreathable air that billowed out from the vehicle's interior was like opening a blast furnace, carrying with it the faint, sweet, sickening smell of overheated plastic and something else. Something indefinably, terrifyingly organic. Leo lay terrifyingly, unnaturally still. His eyes were closed, sunken into his small, flushed face. His small chest, Althea noted with a fresh stab of cold dread, barely moved. If it moved at all. Dr. Althea Ramsey was a woman whose life's work, her very essence, her soul's calling, was a relentless, often heartbreaking, and deeply personal crusade against the myriad shadows where children suffered, where they were abused, neglected, exploited, forgotten. A highly respected pediatrician, by training with a subspecialty in developmental disabilities and child neurology, she had transitioned into public administration years ago, not as a retreat from the front lines of medicine, but as a strategic advance driven by a fierce, unyielding determination to reform broken systems, to challenge entrenched indifference and bureaucratic inertia, and to build robust, effective, and compassionate protections for the most vulnerable, most voiceless members of society. Her role as State Director of Child Welfare was all-consuming, a constant, 24/7, emotionally draining battle against neglect, abuse, systemic failures, resource limitations, and the grinding, soul-crushing weight of bureaucratic indifference. She was known throughout the state and increasingly recognized nationally for her profound, almost tangible compassion, her formidable razor-sharp intellect, her strategic acumen in navigating complex political landscapes, and her absolute, unwavering intolerance for incompetence, cruelty, or deliberate indifference where children were concerned. She had met Sarah and Marcus Washington, Leo's devoted, articulate, and fiercely protective parents, at several child advocacy events, legislative hearings, and policy roundtables over the past few years. Marcus, a quiet, thoughtful, articulate software engineer, and Sarah, a dynamic, passionate, former special education teacher who had by necessity and by choice become a full-time caregiver and a fiery, remarkably effective advocate for children with disabilities, after Leo's complex diagnosis, were a formidable, inspiring team. They were articulate, passionate, and incredibly well-informed champions, not just for their own son, but for all children with complex medical and developmental needs. Their son Leo, with his bright, intensely inquisitive, almost startlingly intelligent eyes, his infectious, heart-melting, silent laughter, and his unique, often astonishingly nuanced way of communicating his vibrant, complex inner world through his cherished, heavily customized voice output communication tablet, had instantly, completely, and irrevocably captured Althea's heart from their very first meeting. He was a child who radiated a fierce intelligence, a profound curiosity, and an unquenchable will to connect, to be understood, despite the formidable, often cruel barriers his own body imposed upon him. Leo's condition, a rare, aggressive, and relentlessly progressive variant of mitochondrial disease, made him exceptionally, terrifyingly vulnerable to a host of environmental and physiological stressors. It affected his muscle tone, rendering him largely reliant on a specialized supportive wheelchair or stroller for any significant mobility. It impacted his speech centers, leaving him entirely permanently non-verbal. It compromised his already fragile immune system, making common childhood illnesses, even a simple cold, potentially life-threatening. And most critically, most terrifyingly, in this horrifying unfolding instance, it severely, catastrophically impaired his body's ability to regulate its own core temperature. Overheating even to a degree that a typical healthy child might tolerate with minimal discomfort could trigger devastating, difficult-to-control seizures, irreversible multi-organ damage, profound permanent neurological injury, even terrifyingly, and with shocking speed, death. His parents were by absolute necessity, meticulous, almost obsessive in the best possible way about his daily care, his hydration, his environment. His surroundings were always carefully, precisely controlled. His specialized, heavily adapted van, equipped with extra high-capacity cooling systems, deeply tinted windows, remote start features, and a host of other intricate modifications designed to ensure his safety, his comfort, his very survival. How Althea wondered again, her mind reeling, her stomach churning with a sickening cold lurch. How in God's name, in this day and age, with all the awareness campaigns, with all the warnings, had he ended up locked alone, helpless, dying in that sweltering mobile death trap in a public parking lot in broad daylight at a conference dedicated to child safety? The question was a raw, gaping wound in her professional soul. The investigation, Althea knew, would have to untangle that. But first, Leo. The interior of the minivan was a palpable, suffocating, almost viscous furnace. Leo was utterly unresponsive, his small body limp as a rag doll, his breathing so shallow, so faint, it was barely perceptible. His skin, when Althea touched his forehead with the back of her gloved hand, was burning hot dry and flushed a terrifying, angry red. Althea, her years of pediatric emergency medical training kicking in with an automatic, almost brutal efficiency, knew they had seconds, not minutes, to reverse the catastrophic effects of the extreme hyperthermia. "Sarah, get water. Cold water, wet towels, ice, if they have it, anything." She yelled, her voice sharp, commanding, cutting through Sarah's paralyzing grief, as she carefully, gently unbuckled Leo from his specialized padded car seat, his small, inert body, frighteningly limp, terrifyingly unresponsive. Officer Miller finally belatedly jolted into some semblance of useful action by the sheer undeniable authority in Althea's voice, the terrifying reality of the situation, and perhaps the dawning, chilling realization of his own profound culpability, was now fumbling awkwardly with his radio, his voice cracking as he belatedly, urgently called for paramedics. His earlier arrogance completely, irrevocably replaced by a pasty-faced, sweat-drenched panic. Another security guard, a younger man named Peterson, who had just arrived, looked on aghast. He'd had a run-in with Sarah earlier about parking a minor disagreement, but nothing like this. He quickly offered to help Althea. Althea, with Peterson's assistance, carried Leo out of the van, laying him gently on a patch of relatively cooler grass in the shade of a nearby ornamental tree. Sarah returned, sobbing hysterically, clutching bottles of water and a stack of damp paper towels she'd grabbed from the community center's kitchen. They began to work frantically, desperately, Althea directing Sarah and Peterson with calm, precise instructions, trying to cool Leo's overheating body, checking his pulse, terrifyingly rapid and thready, his pupils, dilated, fixed, and horrifyingly unresponsive to light. This was bad. Very, very bad. Paramedics arrived with screaming sirens and flashing lights, their disciplined, urgent efficiency a stark, welcome contrast to Officer Miller's earlier bumbling incompetence. They quickly, expertly assessed. Leo started an IV line to push cooled saline-administered high-flow oxygen via a pediatric mask, their faces grim, their movements economical, their hushed professional jargon painting a terrifying picture. Severe, prolonged hyperthermia, probable advanced heat stroke, completely unresponsive GCS of 3. The lead paramedic reported tersely into his radio, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "We need immediate lights and siren transport to University Pediatric ICU. Notify them we have a critical pediatric heat stroke, suspected prolonged entrapment, likely anoxic brain injury. This kid is cooking from the inside out." Kumtam, as they carefully, rapidly loaded Leo onto a specialized cooling gurney and into the waiting ambulance, Althea turned to a visibly shaken, almost catatonic Sarah. Marcus Leo's father had arrived alerted by a frantic text from Sarah, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Go with him, Sarah. Marcus, you too." Althea said, her voice quiet but firm, her hand resting reassuringly on Sarah's trembling shoulder. "Be with your son. I'll meet you at the hospital as soon as I can, and I promise you I will find out how this happened, and whoever is responsible for this, they will answer for it." Her voice was quiet, but her eyes held a resolve that was absolute cold and utterly implacable. With Leo and his distraught parents en route to the hospital, their lives forever altered, Althea turned her formidable attention to Officer Miller, the other guard Peterson, and the rapidly unfolding multi-agency criminal investigation that she herself was now effectively commanding. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice like chips of ice in the sweltering heat, "this vehicle is now an active crime scene. It is to be sealed, impounded, and processed by the State Crime Lab. I want every single witness who saw anything at all related to this child being in this car or who interacted with him or his parents today, identified, separated, and their detailed statements taken immediately by sworn law enforcement. And I want to know right now who was specifically responsible for monitoring this parking lot for ensuring the safety and security of attendees at a county-sponsored, state-supported child safety conference, and why it took a mother's desperate screams to get any kind of effective response." Miller thoroughly cowed his face. Now ashen, stammered, "Yes, ma'am, Director Ramsey. I didn't see who put him in there or when. I responded to Mrs. Washington's distress when she started yelling." Peterson added, "I saw Mrs. Washington earlier, sir, by the entrance. She seemed upset about something with her parking pass, but Leo was with her then in his stroller. This was maybe an hour and a half ago." "You responded by obstructing her, Officer Miller." Althea corrected him sharply, her gaze unwavering. "By actively criminally delaying life-saving aid to a critically ill child. Your conduct and the protocols of this entire security operation will be thoroughly, and I assure you, very publicly reviewed. You may wish to retain legal counsel." A witness, a young mother who had been attending the conference with her own toddler, a woman Althea vaguely recognized from a parenting workshop, stepped forward, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously. "Director Ramsey, I think I saw something. Earlier. Maybe about an hour ago, maybe a little less. I saw that woman, Karen Shaw, from Willow Creek Manor. She was leading a little boy who looked a lot like Leo. He was even holding a tablet towards that blue minivan. He seemed upset, reluctant. He was trying to pull away from her. She was talking to him kind of sternly, but also almost sweetly, if that makes sense. Like she was trying to coax him. I thought it was odd. She's not usually friendly with children, especially not, but I didn't want to interfere to cause a scene. She said something. I overheard her say something to him about needing to keep him safe and quiet in the car for just a little while his mother was very busy in a very important meeting and couldn't be disturbed." Karen Shaw, leading Leo to the van, claiming his mother was busy. Sarah Washington. Althea knew for a fact had been with Althea herself for the past hour in a quiet prep room, preparing for a small breakout session they were scheduled to co-facilitate. Sarah hadn't been busy in any way that would necessitate Karen Shaw, of all people, taking charge of Leo. This wasn't just negligence. This was something far more sinister. This was deliberate. This was abduction. "Did you see Ms. Shaw lock the van or leave the area?" Althea pressed the witness, her voice urgent. I definitely saw her close the door very firmly," the young mother said, her voice trembling, tears welling in her eyes. Then she walked off quite briskly towards the Willow Creek Manor entrance. She was humming, actually humming a little tune, like she didn't have a single care in the world. The witness, who Althea later learned, was the mother of a child with Down syndrome, and had often felt Shaw's disapproval, started to sob. "Oh God, I should have said something. I should have stopped her. I felt like something was wrong, but I was scared of her. She can be so awful." Humming. While a disabled child was slowly, agonizingly baking to death in a locked car, the sheer monstrous, almost unimaginable callousness of it, the profound depravity took Althea's breath away. It was evil, pure, and simple. Get an immediate APB out on Karen Shaw. Althea ordered the ranking police officer on scene, a sharp, experienced county police sergeant named Henderson, who had arrived with the paramedics and was already coordinating with his units. Probable cause for kidnapping, felony child endangerment, aggravated assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. She is to be considered dangerous, potentially unstable, and a significant flight risk. And get a tactical team to her residence in Willow Creek Manor immediately. Secure it. She may have returned there, or she may be trying to destroy evidence. We need to assume she knows we're onto her. Althea was already thinking about Shaw's potential to remotely wipe security footage if the community center had cloud-based storage, a detail to check urgently. The investigation now, a high-priority multi-agency effort, moved with lightning speed, fueled by Althea's cold, righteous fury, Sergeant Henderson's efficient professionalism, and the full, rapidly deployed resources of state and local law enforcement. Security footage from the community center's numerous parking lot cameras, though some angles were frustratingly grainy, corroborated the witness's chilling account with horrifying clarity. Karen Shaw, unmistakable in her bright yellow, ridiculously expensive Chanel knockoff jacket and oversized sunglasses, leading a clearly distressed, struggling Leo towards the Washington's dark blue minivan. She was seen opening the rear sliding door, guiding, almost forcing him inside, then firmly, deliberately closing it. The footage then showed her walking away, pausing briefly, almost thoughtfully, to look back at the van before continuing at a brisk pace towards the pedestrian exit of the parking lot that led to Willow Creek Manor. There was absolutely no indication that she had made any attempt to find Sarah or Marcus Washington, to alert any facility staff, or to ensure Leo's safety in any way. Her actions were purposeful, deliberate, and utterly damning. At University Pediatric ICU, Leo was engaged in a desperate minute-by-minute battle for his life. The doctors, a team of the best pediatric intensivists in the state, diagnosed him with severe advanced heat stroke, profound dehydration, and acute irreversible kidney injury. He was experiencing uncontrolled refractory seizures despite massive doses of emergency anticonvulsant medication. His core body temperature on arrival at the ER had been dangerously, almost unbelievably high, well over 107 degrees Fahrenheit. It's critical, Dr. Ramsey, the attending pediatric neurologist, a man Althea knew and respected, told her, his face etched with a grim, weary gravity. The prolonged extreme hyperthermia has almost certainly caused significant, widespread, and likely permanent anoxic brain damage. We're doing absolutely everything humanly and medically possible, but we need to prepare for the very worst. I'm so sorry. Althea, her own heart aching with a grief and rage that felt almost unbearable, relayed the devastating prognosis to a shattered Sarah and Marcus, who were clinging to each other in a small, sterile hospital waiting room, their faces masks of unimaginable anguish. This couldn't happen. Not to this child, not to this family, not on her watch. The guilt was a physical weight crushing her. She should have seen Shaw's potential for this level of harm sooner. She should have pushed Sarah harder to get that restraining order. Karen Shaw was apprehended less than 2 hours later, not at her home, but at a private airfield on the outskirts of the county, attempting to board a chartered jet to the Cayman Islands, a notorious haven for fugitives and those seeking to evade justice. She had a hastily packed designer suitcase filled with clothes, jewelry, and a large sum of untraceable cash. Her initial reaction to being arrested by a heavily armed SWAT team was not one of fear or remorse, but of indignant, sputtering outrage. "This is an absurd, outrageous mistake," she shrieked at the arresting officers, her voice a shrill, grating whine, her carefully coiffed hair already askew. "I was merely looking out for that unfortunate child. His mother is clearly incompetent, utterly negligent, leaving him to wander around unsupervised, making a dreadful racket. I was simply keeping him safe from himself and from bothering other people. He's a menace with that noisy machine of his, always banging on it, making those dreadful repetitive sounds. He needed to be taught a lesson about proper behavior in public. A little quiet time in the car was for his own good, to calm him down, to give everyone else some peace. I decide what's right here." Her rambling, disjointed, utterly self-serving justifications, her complete and terrifying lack of comprehension of the life-threatening danger she had deliberately, methodically placed Leo in, her casual, breathtaking cruelty and deeply ingrained venomous prejudice, were all chillingly, damningly recorded on the officers' body cams. Later, during a tense confrontational interview with Althea and Sergeant Henderson at the police station after being read her rights, and with her expensive lawyer present and desperately trying to silence her Shaw under relentless probing questioning from Althea about her motives, her obsession with Leo finally catastrophically broke. He was too loud. She screamed, her face contorted spittle, flying her carefully constructed facade of indignant victimhood shattering into a million pieces. He was always too loud, just like her, my sister, my poor dear sister. She suffered so terribly, for years, with a dreadful wasting illness. The sounds she made, the machines, the ugliness of it all. It was unbearable. I couldn't stand it. And that boy, Leo, with his noises, his needs. He reminded me. He was her. I had to make it stop. I had to make him quiet. Just for a little while. It wasn't supposed to. I didn't mean for him to. Her voice trailed off into a series of racking theatrical sobs, a desperate last-ditch attempt at eliciting sympathy that fooled no one in the room, least of all Althea, who saw not a grieving sister, but a manipulative, profoundly disturbed, and murderously dangerous individual. The subsequent search of her opulent home, authorized by a swiftly issued warrant, revealed a disturbing, almost shrine-like obsession with the Washington family, and particularly with Leo. They found meticulously kept handwritten notes detailing Leo's routines, his therapy appointments, his school schedule, even copies of his confidential Individualized Education Program (IEP) from his school documents, likely obtained through illicit, fraudulent means, perhaps by impersonating a social worker or school official. They also found extensive damning internet search histories on her computer and phone, how to discipline a severely autistic child, legal rights of concerned citizens to intervene with disruptive special needs children, effects of extreme heat on children in locked cars, how long can a child survive in a hot car, undetectable ways to disable car alarms, and most chillingly, countries with no extradition treaty with the United States. The premeditation, the calculated malice, the flight risk were all undeniable, irrefutable. This wasn't a reckless mistake, a moment of misguided concern. This was a carefully planned, deliberately executed act of vicious targeted malice, born of a toxic cocktail of deep-seated prejudice, unresolved personal trauma, grotesquely projected onto an innocent child, and a profoundly warped, almost sociopathic sense of entitlement and control. The trial of Karen Shaw was inevitably a media circus, but Althea, working closely with the prosecution team, ensured that the focus remained squarely on the evidence on the devastating harm done to Leo and on the pursuit of justice, not on sensationalism. The evidence, when presented, was overwhelming, irrefutable. Karen Shaw's high-powered, expensive defense attorneys attempted to portray her as a well-meaning but tragically misguided, confused, and increasingly frail senior citizen overwhelmed by Leo's complex disability, triggered by her past family trauma, and acting not out of malice, but out of a distorted, desperate desire to help. The prosecution, led by the county's toughest, most experienced assistant district attorney, armed with the harrowing medical testimony from Leo's doctors, the damning security footage, Karen's own incriminating statements, the evidence of her meticulous, obsessive planning, and Dr. Althea Washington's powerful, authoritative expert testimony on child welfare, child endangerment, and the specific vulnerabilities of children like Leo systematically, ruthlessly, and utterly demolished that pathetic offensive defense. Marcus Washington's quiet, dignified testimony about the vibrant, joyful boy his son was before Shaw's actions and the shell he had become left not a dry eye in the courtroom. Even Officer Miller, testifying for the prosecution under a grant of limited immunity, tearfully admitted his own failures and expressed his profound remorse, his voice cracking as he described his dawning realization of Leo's peril. "I didn't know he was dying," he sobbed. "I swear I just didn't realize, but I should have. God forgive me, I should have." Karen Shaw was found guilty by a visibly shaken and disgusted jury on all counts: kidnapping, felony child endangerment with grievous bodily harm, aggravated assault, and reckless infliction of catastrophic injury on a disabled child. The judge, a veteran jurist known for his stern demeanor but fair judgments, his voice trembling with a barely suppressed rage and sorrow, sentenced her to the maximum possible term in state prison. effectively life without the possibility of parole, calling her actions an act of calculated, monstrous, almost unimaginable cruelty against one of society's most innocent and vulnerable, an offense that shocks the conscience of this community, this state, and this nation, and for which there can be no mitigation, no excuse, and no forgiveness. Her considerable assets were frozen, and a significant portion was subsequently awarded to the Washington family in a separate civil suit to help cover Leo's lifetime of complex, expensive medical care therapy and assistive needs. Leo Washington's recovery was, in the words of his doctors, nothing short of a medical miracle, a testament to his own indomitable fighting spirit, the unwavering love of his family, and the extraordinary skill and dedication of his medical team. He survived, but he was not and would never be unscathed. The profound, prolonged heat stroke left him with significant permanent neurological challenges, further complicating his already existing disabilities, adding new layers of difficulty to his daily life, to his family's life. But he also, in time, slowly, painstakingly, began to heal in his own way, on his own terms. He learned to communicate his trauma, his fears, his enduring light through his art, his vibrant, expressive drawings, becoming a powerful silent testament to his horrific experience and to his incredible resilience. He became afraid of cars for a long time, and Sarah and Marcus found their trust in their community, in the kindness of strangers, deeply, perhaps irrevocably fractured. Dr. Althea Ramsey, profoundly, permanently impacted by Leo's case, by the sheer, avoidable horror of it, by the guilt she carried for not somehow preventing it, used her position as State Director of Child Welfare, her grief and her righteous anger, to champion sweeping, comprehensive, and urgently needed child safety reforms across the state. Leo's Law, a landmark legislative package, was drafted in record time with input from the Washington's child advocacy groups, medical experts, and law enforcement. It was passed with unanimous, emotional, bipartisan support in the state legislature, a rare moment of unity in a deeply divided political landscape. Leo's Law mandated dramatically stricter criminal penalties for all forms of child endangerment, particularly in cases involving heat stroke, leaving children unattended in vehicles, or targeting children with disabilities. Statewide multilingual public awareness campaigns, utilizing all forms of media about the lethal dangers of hot cars, the specific vulnerabilities of children with disabilities, and the importance of immediate bystander intervention. Enhanced mandatory recurrent training for all first responders, law enforcement personnel, educators, and child care providers on recognizing and responding effectively to child abuse and neglect involving disabled children, including specific protocols for interacting with nonverbal individuals, children with sensory processing disorders, and those who communicate through assistive technology. A strengthened Good Samaritan clause, providing robust legal protection for citizens who intervene in good faith to rescue a child or vulnerable adult from a locked car or other life-threatening situation, while also mandating immediate concurrent reporting to 911. Significant state funding for research into and incentives for the adoption of better vehicle safety technology, including occupant detection systems and passive cooling mechanisms to prevent hot car deaths and injuries. The reforms of Leo's Law became a national model, other states quickly moving to adopt similar legislation. Althea Washington found herself in reluctant but determined demand as a speaker sharing Leo's story, her own voice often thick with emotion, advocating for change, for vigilance, for compassion across the country. She often visited Leo and his family, not as a state director, but as Althea, as a friend. He would greet her with a bright, joyful, triumphant tap on his new state-of-the-art communication tablet. "Hi, Dr. Thea Safe Kids, Leo Strong." And Althea would feel a lump in her throat, tears stinging her eyes, a complex mix of sorrow for what he had endured and profound gratitude for his survival, his resilience, his enduring light. Karen Shaw had sought to silence a child, to punish a family, to impose her own twisted, hateful sense of order on a world she no longer understood or controlled. But in doing so, she had unwittingly, ironically unleashed a powerful, transformative force for good, a movement that would make countless children safer, their voices heard, their rights protected, their inherent worth affirmed. The brutal, suffocating heat of that terrible August day had forged not just unspeakable tragedy, but a lasting, living legacy of hope, resilience, and profound, enduring change. A testament to the incredible, unbreakable spirit of a little boy named Leo and to the unwavering, fierce commitment of a woman who had sworn to protect all children as if they were her very own. The fight, Althea knew, was never truly over. But because of Leo, they were all stronger, more vigilant, more determined, and that in itself was a victory.